Mr. Chairman, I can, if you'd like to take roll again or take it from this morning. Just a continuation.
Committee will come to order. Joint Appropriations Committee, January 11, 2023. Welcome, everybody. We're here to consider three matters: local government distribution, a bill on federal encumbrances, and the budget. We're going to go a little bit out of order because we got some folks here from the State Auditor's Office to help us address the bill draft 509, fund balance calculations, federal encumbrances excluded. We'll take that up, then we'll continue our walkthrough of the budget, and we'll finish up with local government funding. So with that, I think, Don Richards, you're up for an explanation of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is a two-page bill, 23 LSO 509, working draft 0.3. This would be a bill to be sponsored by the Joint Appropriations Committee. It is not a Senate file or House bill at this time. Mr. Chairman, there is a statutory definition of fund balance and a methodology for calculating the unobligated, unencumbered fund balance, not only related to the general fund, but other funds for purposes of determining the available balance for appropriation. As noted during the Craig presentation in October, there is a sizable amount of federal encumbrances that are included in that balance, and an amount of money in the general fund is set aside to address those federal encumbrances. So what is a federal encumbrance? A federal encumbrance might be an agency that has the intention to purchase a pickup truck or other supplies, materials, equipment, and they will encumber funds for that purpose. Those funds have not been spent, but then are deducted from the available balance in the general fund. If those purchases are made, and if the federal government does not make good on their reimbursement of dollars to the state government, then there would be sufficient funds set aside in the general fund to cover those expenses. During October, we identified that the federal encumbrance was just over $160 million for the biennium. So that those funds are technically set aside and do not appear on your profile. That was part of the discussion of the governor's office and the state budget office in their December presentation of their budget, acknowledging those funds were available within the general fund. So on page 2, line 11, the only change is 5 words to exclude the encumbrance of federal funds for purposes of determining the cash balance and therefore the unobligated, unencumbered fund balance available for appropriation. The revision on line 12 is merely grammatical.
Please, Mr. Co-Chair.
So Kevin and or Don, could you explain to me, do we have a tally of what this $160 million, where it comes from, what it represents? Is it a combination of various agency dollars or expenditures? That's the first question. And then also, has this been accumulating over time? Or is this something that happens every so often? I'm just curious the background.
Mr. Chairman, it's a combination of just about everything that the state of Wyoming does with the federal government as far as an encumbrance. It's just getting the contracts in place, performing the work, creating an accounts receivable, and collecting the funds from the federal government. And I've been doing this for 30 years, and I have always been able to collect the funds from the federal government. There's times where you get into the October range when they start working in DC and they're talking about continuing resolutions and things like that that are disturbing, but it always seems to come through. So it's just about everything that we do. The second question, if you'd like to repeat that, I'll deal with that too. You had
so, I mean, do you have a tally sheet of what this
Yes, the state auditor's office does have a clean and clear, fully identified sheet on that for that $160+ million.
So I'd like to see the sheet. I'm
So that's available.
curious. And are these, do these recycle each year so that,
Yeah, it's costly. Yeah, it's just an engine. It just continues to move. One of the things that we're experiencing that might be pushing this a little bit taller than normal would be we're getting a significant more amount of federal funds going through our system right now for all the ARPA related stuff and the formula funding that we receive, all the things that we're doing. So I think that's another thing that's, creating this as maybe a larger amount. That'll subside when the subsidies subside, but it's an ongoing situation.
so just to follow up, Mr. Coach, so if this happens every year or every biennium, so it's just a matter of catching up to or having those encumbrances expended and being paid by the feds. But so I guess I had two different questions. If we're just catching up, this is one-time funds.
We're not catching up. This is a revolving
That's what I mean.
constant engine. So for example, this last month, because, Christmas time and people taking time off and things like that, when you cross from December to January, this got up to $125 million in the Fed fund. We recently collected $50 million. We're bouncing somewhere around $93 million, but it's a rolling, constant, revolving. We get the federal fund appropriation, we create encumbrances, we do the work, we build the feds, we collect the money. So this is just a rolling, just a process that we do.
So you just mentioned some numbers. When we had this discussion before in December, I think the dollar amount was roughly 160 billion. So that number has now changed.
It changes quite constantly. I mean, the calculation was a timing event. When you did the 160, that was for the general fund at the time. But as far as the rollover of all the encumbrances, that happens constantly.
Mr. Richards has something to contribute.
Mr. Chairman, I concur that the number changes on a daily or weekly basis. However, for purposes of the calculation of fund balance, that is done at the end of each biennium. It's a set point in time. So that point in time number of just over $160 million will not change. And you will be able, if this bill is adopted, the beginning balance on your goldenrod or the fiscal profile will go up once.
So you want us to do this before tomorrow?
Mr. Chairman, I have no opinion on this whatsoever.
But theoretically, if this bill were passed in the law, then Craig tomorrow would be 150 million more in the general fund.
160.
160 or whatever.
160
that
plus.
number. And then,
Mr. Chairman,
yeah, go ahead.
before you move on from that, I think the other piece of that same question, Mr. Chairman, is would that then not be considered basically one-time funding because it will show up once in time as 160 million and change, whatever it is, and that new number will not arrive until the end of the next biennium, and then it would be a one-time at that point.
It would be calculated again. So
Right. It's just a one-time balance sheet transaction from an encumbrance to cash.
for close of the year end, correct. So that's a specific number, does not change. But my explanation is, as far as our movement, when we actually bill the feds, is still accurate. This is a constant, ongoing process. So next year, when you close the budget,
Please.
you do the calculation again, and it would be a different statistic.
So are these encumbrances, do we establish them statutorily, or is it by rule, or is it by federal regulation that we do this? I mean, we could just say, we have confidence the federal government's going to pay us back, so why do we need to encumbrance the general fund anyway?
The encumbrance is a necessity for just about everything that we do. And I'm going to go back to the WIDOT days. It gets very complicated in WIDOT because you might have 60 different separate funding streams that you're managing with an appropriation and authorization and a budget amount. So if you have a contract, for exactly when you go to contract, it's very important for us to say, okay, we go through the STIP, we go through the letting, and then we set up a contract with the vendor. That contract isn't going to necessarily mean the final price because they might finish it for less. But we encumber those funds so we don't spend them twice. Once they're encumbered, they remain encumbered until such time as they're liquidated. So the encumbrances keeps us in place where we actually know how much money is available at any point in time. And the federal government requires us to have those funds encumbered as well on the surface transportation side of the fence. So the encumbrance is a valuable accounting tool for us to be able to say, here's your original amount of money or appropriation and how that appropriation is being spent and then what's available. And then finally, once you have the expenditure, then that gets liquidated. And then eventually the appropriation gets liquidated.
So,
But there is no you're not doing it by statute. You're doing it for an accounting purpose and or federal rule or reg. Is that fair? I'm just curious.
but I just, and before we go there, I just, a quick question, because then I want to finish out with the illustration that Mr. Richards had, anticipating a question from the floor. So we encumber the money just in case the feds don't pay. We're gonna now realize $160 million in cash one time, and then there will no longer be any encumbrances for these things set aside. So if the feds were not to pay, we haven't set anything aside. Is that the correct answer?
Mr. Chairman, that is a correct answer. And then understand that there's two things happening in the conversation. The one-time calculation to balance the books, which is the $160 million plus. That's what we're discussing. And saying that we will not necessarily recognize that encumbrance in that calculation. But then the other thing is there is an ongoing process with encumbrances. And then to answer Chairman Nicholas's question, yeah, there's statutory sightings throughout Title IX, et cetera, about encumbrances and processes.
So then in addition, so the question is going beyond the statute, which mandates that we exclude encumbrances from monies available to appropriate. The question is whether there's some accounting standard or federal regulation that requires it, or we're just doing it to ourselves, I guess. Is that right, Mr. Co-Chair?
Yeah, just understand why we're doing it and why it happens.
Is the answer maybe we've just always done it that way? Welcome.
What happened to the trust me stick?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Christy Racina, State Auditor. I might back up just a little bit. I know that some of you know way more than this, but particularly for the newer members, I feel like we might be doing a little bit of apples and oranges and other exotic fruit here. So I'm going to back up just a little bit and talk about
Kind of like this committee.
kiwis. We're onto kiwis and kumquats and anyway. So I want to talk first just for a moment about the way federal funds come into the state and then separately this calculation that we perform and then how those two things have sort of collided in this manner. So the state receives a lot of federal funds. I know that most of you know that. For years, that is been around $1 billion, 1.2 billion, and again, that's annually. So that amount, as you know, has skyrocketed in the last couple of years. So 2020, we were at about 2.1 billion, 2021, 1.8, 2022, we were at about 1.7. Now that's excluding UW, that's excluding YDOT. So you add in those agencies, we're well over 2 billion in each of the last 3 years. So lots and lots of money.
Mr.
Now,
Chairman.
a couple of the,
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Please. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Auditor Racine. I hope you don't mind my interruption
No
here.
problem.
When you refer to the federal funds, does that also include like the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements and all of that side of things as well?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, yes, that is every dollar of federal funds that comes to the state of Wyoming. It regardless of agency or federal agency that it's coming from.
Representative Larson.
So then thank you, Representative Walters, and Auditor Racinas. I just, an example for me might be 4E, which is a reimbursement. We have to cover that cost to pay the agency or the providers and then we'll get reimbursed. Once we get reimbursed from that, and then that frees up our funds.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, exactly. I think some of the federal funds, sort of more COVID banner programs that we're familiar with, CARES Act, the 1.25 billion, and then the ARPA funds that was, there was the big pot of just over $1 billion. They sent us that money up front. I mean, actually it appeared in the bank account and nobody had mentioned anything. And, you get a call from the treasurer's office. That is highly unusual. And that is very, very different from the overwhelming majority of federal funds and federal grants that come into the state. Those are almost all on a reimbursement basis, which meaning we have to spend our own money and then we get it back from the feds. Now, the timing of that getting it back from the feds varies by program. Some is a quarterly draw, some is a monthly draw. And that is the amount that we call the float. And currently the general fund floats that dollar amount. And to all of your points, we have always gotten it back unless it's found out that we've spent something incorrectly. And I think those amounts have been pretty minor. That amount, we start to get a little nervous and we start to get on agencies when it gets to 70 million or more than 70 million. That's when we ping Kevin and we say, okay, Kevin, get on your agencies. They need to request reimbursement. That has actually hit over $1 million or over $100 million for the first time. So not a problem per se, but just so that everybody knows, as long as we're taking those federal funds, $100 million of the general fund is reserved for that purpose. So that's sort of one component that I wanted to talk about a little bit. Now, the calculation at issue in this bill, this is something we do once every 2 years to then present a number that is available for appropriation to the governor. Our calculation is driven by statute. And again, it has been consistent that encumbrances have always been removed from that amount because general fund, once something's encumbered, that money is essentially spoken for. There's benchmarks that you have to meet to make an encumbrance on. Encumbrances are approved by the procurement division of A&I. You can't just say, I just want to encumber some money because I want to, or I feel like it, or I want to keep it in my, keep it over here. There's a benchmark to meet to actually qualify as an encumbrance. And in regular general funds, that's legitimate. That money is very highly likely to be spent and it is gone. So reappropriating that would be problematic. Now, to muddle things a little bit further, for years, there was no way to tell which encumbrances were federal money and which were general fund, because like I said, that federal money flows through the general fund. And so the encumbrance amount was just a lump sum. There was no way to tell. So I think it was in 2016 or 2017, my predecessor went on an effort to try to segregate federal funds from the general fund. They're still technically in the general fund, but it is, it's just been the biennium ended 2020 that we even knew that there was a separate amount of federal encumbrances. So this is sort of, if you're wondering, gosh, is this a new problem? Not particularly. We've always removed this amount from that calculation. It's never been on the table for appropriations because we didn't even know what the amount was that related to money we would get back from the federal government versus regular old general fund money that once it's spent, it's gone. Mr. Chairman, absolutely, that's correct. There wasn't even a mechanism to track it. So in 2020, that amount that we removed from our calculation, took off the table, was 61 million. And then this last year, it was 161 million. And that's why this is sort of like that number sort of surprised everyone. Now, when you look at percentages based on like the amount of federal funds, when you look at the percentage of that encumbrance versus overall, overall funding, it's not remarkable, but it's become a pretty big amount. Policy wise, we don't really think we should have an opinion on this. But Mr. Chairman, sorry, what? Gosh, I'd have to.
Excuse me, 5 to 10% of all encumbered funds in the general fund?
Federal fund over that course of that period of time. If you've got 1.2 to 2.2 billion or a billion of federal dollars, then if you put in a percentage on it, I'm just giving a swag to it.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, although the encumbrance number for this calculation is a point in time, and the expenditure of those funds, particularly with these giant buckets we've been pushing out, hasn't necessarily been equal. And I would just end with the decision of whether to spend $161 million or not felt above my pay grade. It felt more like it felt like a legislative decision to me. So that's
Is it like 150 that really run?
I would have done 100 million, Mr. Chairman, but not more than that. So
Let me, I got a little bit lost between his question and your answer. I heard you, what I heard you to say is you still encumber a lot of general funds for expenditures, and that the encumbered federal funds is a subset of that. And that it's a relatively small percentage compared to the overall amount of encumbrances.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, no, it's a small percentage compared to the overall amount of federal funding we receive.
Okay.
Because the first thing, when we came up with this very large amount, we were sort of, speaking with LSO, speaking with Kevin, we were saying, what went wrong? Did we calculate something wrong? But then when we actually look at that federal encumbrance, percentage as a percentage of federal funds, it's not alarming per se. It's more the big policy change has been that we can actually track this now.
Please, Mr.
Let me-
Co-Chair.
Yeah, let me try to back into this from the other way around. So I think this is why Kevin brought it up. It makes sense because of the size of the number that it can be appropriated because the dollars are there, because they were encumbered or will become unencumbered. And so if we don't do it now, it'll just show up in the general fund dollar there as a corrective dollar at some point in time. Is that? Yeah.
Chairman, I believe if we don't do this, then each iteration we will still be warehousing those funds and they won't be available for appropriation. That's one-time events each biennium will still hold us back on that encumbrance amount that we know is in play and we know we can bill for and receive. We're holding back money that we
don't have to.
Yeah. So where I'm lost is I hadn't heard the why. Is there a GASB standard, or it's not GASB anymore, it's something else, but is there a GASB standard that dictates these encumbrances? Because if not, why do we encumber anything at all?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's maybe a larger policy discussion. There's not a GASB standard, I don't think, that requires us to encumber money. It's an important tool to help agencies manage their expenditures and understand and track their budgets. For example, if you had a contract for a software vendor, you can, in our accounting system, you can encumber that money. It's a commitment that you're going to have to pay, and that you can still see those funds, but it sort of takes it off the table. So you're not going to accidentally overspend.
So for purposes of consistency, I'm still not understanding why we wouldn't do it for Fed funds, but we would do it for anything else. Mr. Hibbard, do you have an answer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do it for everything. We do it for special revenue, we do it for general funds, and we do it for federal funds. And maybe this will help. When you're looking at available budget for an agency, How much money do I have available today? That math is the original budget, less the expenditures, less your encumbrances. The unencumbered amount is what's available for you to proceed to do more work.
So what I heard you say is it's a tool for the department heads to track. Now we're gonna stop with that tool. And now how are you gonna bird dog them that they're actually submitting their reimbursements timely?
So-
May I
Mi-
interject?
Mr. Chairman, we are not going to stop encumbering federal funds. It's just in the calculation that the auditor office presents in order to tell the governor how much he has to profile. This bill would make it so we no longer subtract federal encumbrances. I don't think there's any contemplation of changing the way we use
Okay.
encumbrances on a
Mr.
daily
Hibbard?
basis.
Absolutely. We are not going to stop using the feature of encumbrances for our financial practices. This is simply addressing a situation where we calculated the available general funds on a one-time basis. That's unnecessary to take that money off the table for the legislature to appropriate. But we will continue. It's an absolute necessity that we use encumbrances so that we can make sure that we have the safeguards in place not to overspend dollars.
So just now let's just follow up, kind of bring this home. So what we've done, what our intention is to take this 160 million and park it as part of, to match one of the governor's requests for an extra 50 million for the large project components of ARPA. So we're actually giving them 2 times more than what he asked for. And so then the question is does the money go out and go someplace, or it just sits where it's located? And if the gov comes and says, okay, we need 250 million to do this project, then the cash will be available. That's simple. Is that?
Mr. Chairman, right now, because we're just doing a mathematical calculation, there is $160 million plus unavailable for the legislature or the governor to make recommendations, the legislature to appropriate, or the governor make recommendations. So CapCon, whatever you choose, you're just going to say, this is a calculation that if we address this through the statute, it'll make these dollars available for funding. Because really what we're doing here is we're holding back money that we were assured to collect from the federal government anyway.
So what's the grand total? I mean, why not be consistent if we're not going to count these encumbrances? Why not count all the encumbrances, Don?
Mr. Chairman, I think the distinguishing factor between federal funds and their encumbrances are they are reimbursable. The other funds do not have a reimbursement associated with them. If you encumber funds in a special reserve account or in a general fund account, there's no one else coming in and paying those accounts receivable once the purchases are made. In my mind, that's the distinguishing factor of federal encumbrances over all other encumbrances.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Co-Chair? Anything else, committee members? All right, thank you. We'll open it up for public comment. Any comment from members of the public? Okay, how would you like to proceed? Work the bill? You move the bill? I'll second. It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the bill? Discussion? So this is not a roll call because it's just a draft, is it?
Well, we could do a roll call. We identified this.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, in the absence of direction otherwise, we will follow as staff, and please feel free to direct us otherwise. We will follow the sample committee rules on this vote. This committee has not adopted rules for this.
No, well, I think it's going to be unanimous anyway. Go ahead and call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is 23 LSO 509 working draft 0.3. Representative Henderson. Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood. Representative Stith. Representative Walters.
Aye.
Representative Zwanitzer Dave. Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Guru. Aye. Senator Nethercott. Senator Salazar. Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
Chairman Kinski.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the bill has been adopted. Would you like this to be a House bill or a Senate file?
Anybody over here you want to take it first? House bill.
You guys are
Senate bill.
moving faster than we are. You can probably kick it out.
All right, Senate bill. Be a Senate bill. Who wants it? Okay. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
so that concludes that matter. We're back on the walk up. Kevin, did you need something more? You raised your hand. Okay, so we're back on the bill, walking through the bill. We left off with state lands and investments on SR, that is page 11. And on the budget, it is which page? Page 44. Don, the floor is yours. Now, I've got a question. Why do you sit over there sometimes, but there sometimes? What's the difference?
Mr. Chairman, we provide this for any public comment, so we did not want to intrude upon the state auditor's
I
office or any
see. Well,
members.
it doesn't bother Kevin.
I just have thicker skin. Clearly I need it.
Thank you. Please proceed, Don.
Mr. Chairman, we will continue on page 44 of the budget. And Elizabeth Martineau will take the next couple of agencies.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, page 44, we're starting with the Office of State Lands and Investment. Beginning on line 13, we have the first note. Oh, if it's helpful, we're also on page 11 of the summary report, the legal side sheet. So JAC did deny the governor's recommendation of $181,000 for a policy planning analyst. However, JAC did adopt 2 governor's recommendations to add 4 positions to OSLI, including 2 land management analysts, a GIS analyst, as well as a records and data management analyst. Next, JAC decreased the governor's letter number 6. It was $10 million for the mineral royalty grant program. This can be found on line 21. And JAC decreased it to $4 million and added footnote number 4. Thank you. Footnote number 4 on page 46 that had some specifications on the qualification for counties, towns, and municipalities to be able to qualify for these additional funds.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to interject here on footnote number 4. It's one of the longer footnotes in your bill. This was a direction to staff to allow only those municipalities that comprise the lowest 30% of per capita sales tax and counties that comprise the lowest 30% of per capita ad valorem tax. And I believe you have a handout in your 3-ring binder, which has colors on it. It's a 1-page double-sided. And the first page illustrates the impacts that this footnote would have, meaning just 6 counties would qualify: Albany, Natrona, Sheridan, Goshen, Washakie, and Uinta. The next 2, we just tried to see, is there a natural cutoff point later on? And it looks like if it would require 35% to include those next 2 counties. Why did we do that? Because it's getting down to $100 increments as to who becomes eligible and who does not become eligible. Since this is based
Don, we're looking for the exhibit. Is it in one of these yellow tabs?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the top yellow tab, it should say MRG ranking.
Oh, very back. I got you. Okay.
So we just wanted to make it very clear. You can see Albany County has a modest population, a very low assessed value. Natrona County has quite a high assessed value, but it also has a very high population. So they would qualify. So it's perhaps a little interesting as to which counties would qualify for these MRG grants and which would not. I also wanted to note that you also limited the purposes for which the funds could be used are limited to infrastructure and emergencies. So those are the two purposes for which funds can be used. On the second side of that two-page document, we've done the same thing where those communities or municipalities that are shaded in green illustrate those that have the lowest per capita sales and use tax and would be eligible for MRG grants as selected by SLIB. We just wanted you to have that.
So those in pink are ineligible?
Correct. And those in yellow are currently also ineligible.
Clearly, the formula is missing the mark. I mean, there's some towns there that just are little towns that, you know, don't have two nickels to rub together. Senator Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So those in yellow are ineligible right now?
Mr. Chairman, yes, those are ineligible. Only the green would be eligible. And we tried to make is there another natural cutoff point? It's entirely subjective. But for example, on the counties, you're basically going in $100 increments. And that difference between Bighorn County and Uinta County is relatively small. And so that next big jump up $3,000 per capita assessed valuation occurs maybe when you get to Laramie County. Certainly it's a judgment for you to make, and you can set the percentage. Currently, under the current law, all counties and all municipalities are eligible. This was a restriction that JAC approved in December. So it's a deviation from current law.
So you know, I don't know that we were married to it. We just spitballed it to see what it looked like and how it came out. And now we know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I think at least we considered that there would be a real distinction based on that calculation. We'd see a real distinction between counties and this has really proved to be interesting. I think we'll probably have to look at that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe just tradition. In the past, it was simply emergencies for smaller and poorer communities. And if you look at the list, it's pretty much that, except one time, one of the larger, wealthier communities snuck their nose in under the tent, but they were pretty consistent otherwise. Okay. So we're definitely going to have to revisit that one. Anything else on that before we have Don move on? Okay, back on the bill. That was SLIB. So there was oh, please, I thought you were pointing over there. Senator Nethercott.
Just logistically, this is my agency, so when would we revisit that and get a?
Probably tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Right, that would fall under, I think, technical amendment, something that we've got to get cleaned up before we go forward. Okay. Back on the bill, page
48, Mr. Chairman.
anything else? I'm sorry. Okay. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. So for the new members, again, when we go through round robin and want to make amendments on what we adopted in the previous bill, the round robin would be the good time to do that. So we could rectify that, change it back to the way it originally was. You could, you know, we can look at that and make a number of suggestions at that time.
Yeah, we've had round robins where we clarified language, fixed mistakes, that sort of thing. Okay. So we left off at page 47.
Mr. Chairman, we're on page 48. We are now moving to the Wyoming Tourism Board. The JAC did adopt the governor's recommendation of $600,000 for the welcome centers in the northeast and southwest parts of the state. Next, Mr. Chairman, we're moving to agency 67 on page 50. This is the University of Wyoming. There are quite a few actions in the university, starting on lines 9 and 10 in state aid. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $1.6 million for the Wyoming Agriculture Experimental Stations. JAC also adopted the governor's recommendation of $3.6 million for the Science Initiative Program expansion. JAC denied the governor's recommendation for additional campus security improvements. JAC denied the governor's recommendation, which was a denial. So you added $500,000 for the College of Education initiatives and added footnote number 11, which can be found on page 56. Finally, in state aid, JAC added $860,000 and footnote number 12, specifying that those funds should be used for the biosafety level 3 laboratory staff, bringing them to as close to industry market compensation as possible. And I believe Don may have some comments on that one.
Mr. Chairman, I think this was a joint amendment with Representative Walters and Senator Hicks. And it basically provides for $460,000 to increase the compensation levels for 3 vacant pathologist positions. Once 2 of them are filled, then there is an additional $400,000 released for the purposes of increased compensation for an epidemiologist, 2 technicians, and the director at the BSL 3. Footnote number 12 on page 50.
Okay.
Correct.
Moving forward, on line 14 and 15, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $12.5 million for the School of Energy Resources, Carbon Engineering Research and Demonstration projects. Additionally, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $2.5 million for the UW Maori Research Program. Next, on line 16 and 17, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $5.5 million for Tier 1 engineering. Next, in endowments, on lines 19 and 20 and 21, JAC added or adopted the governor's rec of $1.5 million for the School of Energy Resource matching and added footnote number 13 for those matching requirements that can be found on page 57. And JAC added $2.5 million for the College of Agriculture for Endowment Challenge Funds and added footnote 14 specifying those matching requirements.
So did I miss it? We took money out of the governor's win to fund the university's advanced computing system. Shouldn't that be reflected in the university's budget somewhere, or did I miss something?
Mr. Chairman, that is still included in the appropriation in the governor's office, but that amount was transferred, $27 million, and $5 million of that was transferred for the UW advanced computing system. So all of that appears in footnote in agency 1.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we will proceed to the retirement system, which can be found on page 58 of the bill. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $116,000 and 1 FTE for an accountant. I would note on page 59 in footnote number 1, you'll notice that there is some language stricken. This is just conforming with a state treasurer's office, pardon me, with the state treasurer's office footnote that is the same.
So, Mr. Chairman, I did want to pause there. So page 59, line 1, that was not a specific motion by this committee. It is a conforming amendment if you don't concur with that. We did this for 2 reasons. 1, so that the WRS investment officers would have this identical footnote to the STO investment officers. And secondly, we know that their Select Committee on Capital Finance has a bill. So there is a bill that changes the performance compensation, particularly for those lowest levels. Well, if that passes, that is with legislative action. And we had some concern is, well, what is the executive action and would signing the bill be sufficient if it were challenged? So that's why we took those 3 words out.
Okay. Questions? All right, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on page 59, we're going to move into the Department of Enterprise Technology Services, or ETS, Agency 077. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $7.2 million for cybersecurity. And not shown in the table, but JAC also denied the governor's recommendation of $509,000 in 2 positions for GIS. That's note number 2 on your status report. Next, on page 60 of the bill, we have the Department of Corrections. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $1.6 million for 2019, House Bill 53, and that was probation and parole incentives and sanctions. On line number 16, JAC adopted the Gov's recommendation of $380,000 for software replacement. JAC also adopted the governor's recommendation of $2.3 million for the adult community corrections bed expansion. JAC also adopted $1.7 million for the same purpose, adult community correction beds, but these are for the existing beds. Next, Mr. Chairman, we're moving to page 62 and the Wyoming Business Council. On lines 5 and 6, we show that JAC denied a governor's rec, which was a denial. So you added $141,000 and one position for an agency project manager. I would note here, if you look on lines 17 through 19, you will notice that there are no positions in the Business Council. That's because they don't have legislatively authorized positions. So you did add a position to the Business Council, that we just don't show their positions. Next, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $30 million for the Business Ready Communities Program, or BRC, and that can be seen on lines 8 and 9. Finally, JAC added $2.5 million for community facilities programs. And
One real quickly on floor question is going to be on footnote 2. Well, I'm looking at the SR. After this appropriation, what will be the total in the BRC fund balance?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, $54.3 million total. And that appears on page 62, line 9 of the bill.
And I think it's been a while since it got to that level, hasn't it?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I'd have to go back and look. It certainly in some years, I think, has exceeded that amount.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Please proceed. Sorry for
course.
the interruption.
absolutely no worries, sir. Finally, we have JAC adding $2.5 million for the community facilities program, as I mentioned, and footnote number 4, which can be found on page 66, that specifies what those funds can be used for.
Mr. Chairman, I'd interject here on page 62, line 11. It is totaling 2.5 million, but the direction we received is to use up all of SIPA funds first. So there was 104,661 in SIPA, and then the balance was in general fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering if you could give me a backstory on, I know the community facilities program started with the Business Council, but now the CBDG program, which sort of is in cohorts with that or complementary to that, now is with the Wyoming Community Development Authority. So is there any thought behind who really should take the lead on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Don?
Mr. Chairman, the Community Facilities Program is a state statutory program. And there's also the WCDA is not a state agency. They don't appear in the budget bill, and rather they are an instrumentality of the state. There are some concerns about appropriating money directly to them because currently their bonds, the state is not liable for if they default. If they become a state agency and you exert some administrative control over them, our attorneys have raised the issue of whether the state would have some liability associated with that. I won't get into the details, but that's the high level.
And Don, I think originally I had indicated that it would go into the Main Street program, and you identified this as a program that's previously been used to repurpose schools for community centers, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct.
Anything else, Representative Sherwood? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, next on the bottom of page 63, going on to the page 64, we have the Wyoming Energy Authority, Agency 90. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $175,000 to provide additional contract services for one additional person to focus on carbon capture utilization. JAC also adopted the Gov's rec of $335,000 for the Wyoming CO2 initiatives. And JAC added $500,000 for Wyoming coal marketing and included footnote number 1 on page 64.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, I did want to note this as well. Footnote number 1, the motion directed us to put this in the Wyoming Energy Authority. This exact program does appear in law in the governor's office, and the governor has the ability to transfer those funds, which he did last time. But that's why you see on page 64, a modestly long footnote. That footnote would be eliminated if it was the pleasure of the committee to move this $500,000 into the governor's office.
Okay. Don, refresh my recollection. There were some concerns raised about WEA that there was some constituents thought they weren't going to be writing grants. And I think were they entering an MOU with SER and some other agencies to get those grants written? What was the resolution of that?
Mr. Chairman, I think the significant issue there was on energy efficiency and municipal grants. And the problem was really one of staffing. And the individual who was tasked with that left and took a job with another employer. He has since been contracted back to finish this fiscal year's worth of grants. But that position, to my knowledge, continues to remain vacant. And adding one additional thought for this is the director has indicated that his last day, I believe, will be March 1st. So he will be leaving as well. So that this entire agency essentially, which is, these are not state employees, these are state contracted employees, have a number of vacancies to carry on the work, not only of WEA, but to facilitate assistance to other entities.
Thank you. Questions, concerns? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just looking at the good work that's been done by the Wyoming Energy Authority, it is a little concerning that they don't have somebody to manage all of the grant funds, that they're either getting out or getting in. So I do agree with this notion that they are short-staffed. And I just wanted to plant a seed that we may want to consider someday supporting the creation of a position to manage grants within the Wyoming Energy Authority. Thank you.
Well, I think part of the other problem was some of the grant programs were not necessarily core to their mission. One of them was like home efficiencies or something. Sounds like it belongs in a consumer agency or DFS or something.
That's exactly right. When the Pipeline Authority and the Infrastructure Authority merged, the WEA also inherited grant programs related to energy that had previously been administered by the Business Council.
Senator Guru? No? Okay. All right. Anything else before we move on? All right. Thank you, Don.
Next, we're moving to, Mr. Chairman, to page 65 in the Supreme Court. JAC adopted the court's rec of $177,000 for an audiovisual support specialist. And the JAC also adopted the court's rec of $107,000 for a data trainer. However, JAC did deny the court's request for a staff attorney to focus on federal compliance. You did add footnote number 4 on page 67, which is for one time. Next, on lines 12 and 13, JAC did adopt the court's rec of $30,000 for commission travel to interview judicial candidates. Next, on line 16 and 17, JAC did adopt the court's rec of $30,000 for housing allowance in Judicial District number 9, which is Fremont, Sublette, and Teton counties. Next, JAC did denied the court's rec of $50,000 to hire temporary staff to assist with judge respite.
And point of clarification, the respite for judges was just circuit court, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe it was limited to circuit court. I believe it applied to district court as well. Based on the request, and we can double check that.
Okay. Senator Guru?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't think that was true. Sorry, I didn't think that was true. I thought it was more than just a circuit court.
Okay. Well, it's just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the next agency for your consideration is, or education, is page 67, Judicial District 9B. And on line 16 and 17, The Joint Appropriations Committee concurred with the court's recommendation to add $25.9 million or $1,000, $29,500 for housing allowance in Judicial District 9B. At the top of page 68, the county and prosecuting attorneys, the Joint Appropriations Committee concurred with the governor's recommendation and added $467,000 to reimburse the expenses of counties under the statutory formula for prosecuting attorneys. Section 205, Education School Finance. This recommendation reflects, or this action reflects, the JAC position, not the governor's position, for a total of $43.6 million for educational cost adjustment, external cost adjustment, and included footnote number 2. On page 60 or 70, you will see lines 1 through 9 refer to a new external cost adjustment for purposes of labor, professional labor and non-professional labor in subparagraphs 1 and 2. And lines 11 and 19 sustain last year's ECA for educational materials and energy. There is no new ECA related to educational materials and energy, which was the governor's recommendation. I would also note that only a portion of this increase, rather specifically $35.2 million for the entitlement payments, appears in the budget. Those districts who have reduced recapture appear on the profile, but not on the budget. And that amount amounts to totals $8.4 million, which is the 43.6 combined.
And Don, the 43.6, what is the biennial figure on that?
Mr. Chairman, excellent point, and something I failed to include. This per language on the bottom of page 69 is for fiscal year 24 only. So it does not biennialize and it does not sustain itself going forward. It goes back to 0.
Okay. All right. Mr. Vice Chair.
To the judicial question you posed.
Okay.
So as Mr. Chairman, as I go back and Don, as I go back and look at that 50,000 for respite coverage, it makes note that many circuit court judges are on call 24 hours a day, but that doesn't identify the direction of that funding specifically to them. It just uses circuit court judges as an example, if I'm reading that right.
Well, we did have a discussion with the Chief Justice and we'll get that clarified.
Mr. Chairman, next is the Department of Education on page 70. This is just a complimentary note to the action that took place in the governor's office that Don spoke about earlier today. The JAC did adopt the $26,000 for the Education Commission of the States, and you did transfer that here to the Department of Education and added footnote number 2 or 5 on page 73, specifying that you would like these funds to continue in the Department of Education's budget versus the governor's office budget. Mr. Chairman, now we are into the boards and commissions. This is on page 73. We are on the Wyoming Gaming Commission, which in the bill last year was shown as a pari-mutuel commission. And so this year we just strike and underline that to show the correct name for this year. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the governor's recommendation for several positions for the Gaming Commission, including a licensing clerk and 2 inspectors for off-track wagering. The JAC did deny the governor's request for the peace officer, and the remaining SR notes, the remaining notes 5 and 6 are simply the IT associated with those positions.
Oh, that's right.
Finally, on page 74, we have the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board. JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of $39,000 for administrative services increases. JAC also adopted the $103,000 request for background checks. And finally, JAC did adopt the $18,000 request to access the National Practitioner Database to keep track of licensing disciplinary actions.
Mr. Chairman, the balance of the bill is section 300. It appeared.
This is where we need to make a lot of notes on these 300s because there's all kinds of action that takes place in the 300 series. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, consistent with our LSO's drafting practices, only the subsections that are amended or new subsections are included. So everything else, you'll notice, for example, in section 300A through C are missing, consistent with our drafting standards. So beginning at the top of page 75, the first addition is a $40 million transfer. That was $35 million recommended by the governor and an additional $5 million added by JAC for purposes of the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Endowment Fund. Transfer from the general fund to that endowment fund. Lines 9 through 14 will not appear in the bill. They're here only for the benefit of this committee. It will, in the bill, it will be repealed, so it will not be struck. And this is consistent with the governor's recommendation. You have removed the transfer from the local government capital construction account or the MRG program to the general fund in the amount of $6.176 million. So that deposit will remain in the MRG program. Lines 16 through 27 and 1 through 7 on the top of page 76 are all deposits or transfers from the LSRA to the four reserve accounts: the PMTF reserve account, the Common School reserve account, the Hathaway reserve account, and the Higher Ed Excellence Endowment reserve account. All four of these sections are essentially identical to the Select Committee's bill, which is dubbed the Total Return Bill. The same provisions appear in that bill as this bill. I would bring to your attention that there was no motion to make this contingent upon the action on that other bill. So you may want to keep that in mind. And if both were to pass, you would have twice the money going into these accounts, which I'm not sure is anyone's intent. So you may want to make those four sections contingent upon the Select Cap Finance Bill. The bottom of page 76, subsections T, U, W, and Y have been provided in prior budget bills. These are the notwithstanding current law to prohibit the tips from the reserve accounts to the corpus. What this ensures is that the funds remain available for appropriation in future years, but they do not transfer any amount into the corpus. Again, all four of those are not contingent on any legislation passing or failing. I just wanted to note that. And it's not quite clear whether that matters or not in my mind. Currently, these funds are not expected to reach their tipping point. However, if P, Q, R, and S are adopted and T, U, W, and Y are not adopted, it will have the effect of transferring funds from the LSRA to the permanent fund corpus. So kind of an odd result there. So I just wanted you to be aware of what.
So one more time.
So if no, I am not, but I want to be very clear as to what will happen. If P, Q, R, and S are adopted and T, U, W, Y are not adopted, it will have a similar effect of a transfer from the LSRA to those four permanent funds: Higher Ed, Hathaway, Common School, and Permanent Wyoming Trust Fund. Not the entirety of it, but at some point, each of those will hit its cap, and then there'll be a tip. So those 8 subsections kind of all work in tandem, and they also would be impacted by another piece of legislation that you'll be considering. As Chairman Kinski mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts there.
And so Dawn, remind me what we did in the budget bill, because the language on page 76, T through Y, is new. So that was not contained in the budget bill itself.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And the reason it's here.
Mr. Chairman, there was a motion that prevailed in the Joint Appropriations Committee in December.
Okay.
Before I leave section 300, I would refer you to the notes on the summary sheet because this applies to the same area. And it doesn't appear in the bill because JAC denied it, but the governor did recommend several transfers to permanent funds that you did not go along with. $412 million to the PMTF, $68 million to the retirement fund for public employee retirement, $248 million of FMRs to the school fund or to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. So those were denied. They don't appear in the bill because of that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, on page 77, the Joint Appropriations Committee cut half of the major maintenance funding and appropriated approximately $8.7 million. The percentages change, you will see from the recipients, and the largest reason for that is, first of all, there was some square footage change from year to year, but the biggest component was the University of Wyoming will now receive a larger share of these major maintenance funds because they continued the expenditure of major maintenance during COVID, and the other entities, community colleges, state, suspended any expenditures. So the percentages will change on this appropriation. Moving on to section 309 on page 78. This is a concurrence with the governor's recommendation and the Department of Health to allow the Department of Health to expend carryover funds on the public health laboratory. No new appropriation, just an expansion for the eligible purposes. At the bottom of page 78 and top of page 79, I want to bring this to the attention of the committee. This was not voted upon. This is entirely conforming language consistent with the supplemental budget adopted in 2021. And it really provides you a lot of benefit. So we included it in there for your consideration. This refers to all of the governor's recommendations in his budget that were one-time, sustained, or biennialized. And quite frankly, the vast majority of this year's budget was one-time. And it ensures that all of those one-times do not appear in the subsequent biennial budget with the adoption of this language. Basically, you're just concurring with the gov's budget. On page 79, we began the school capital construction. Page 80 is the actual changes. We talked about this very briefly this morning. We interpreted the committee's motion to be the most recent handout of inflationary requests for school facilities. And we applied that $20.3 million, which is approximately $1.3 million lower than their initial request, but is their most recent handout that they provided the committee in December. Now, which communities benefit from that? You will recall that there is a handout there that was circulated but not numbered for the committee's consideration. And this falls into the ability for the state construction department to make changes based upon the actual inflation at each of those school facilities. So it's not a published list of where those where that $20 million would
And
reside.
Don, this is construction, not major maintenance, correct?
Mr. Chairman, it is all for construction for previously approved projects. Mr. Chairman, on page 81, if there's no.
Was there any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Walters.
on that, I just add, yes, it's construction, but it might be construction down to the level of a new HVAC system is considered construction. So please don't consider it to be entirely building an entire new school per se. It's just how construction is defined within our confines.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the original request in October to the Select Committee on School Facilities was $21.7 million, and that has been reduced to $20.33 million.
By their own calculation.
Correct. And they did submit that number to you in your materials.
Anything there, folks? Okay, Don, page 81.
Page 81 is the allowance to use carryover AML funds originally appropriated about 8 years ago for purposes of natural gas pipeline matching, or pipeline mapping, rather, that was unexpended. And the Department of Environmental Quality, with the recommendation of the governor, is asking to revert those funds and expend a like amount. And this is the last of AML funds that are known available for purposes of air quality modeling and monitoring.
What was the amount? 8 years ago, you say?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
The last of the AML.
actually, it's a little bit more. It was originally appropriated in 2012, so 10 years ago.
Okay. All right, Don.
Page 82. This is section 321 in concurrence with the governor's recommendation in governor's letter number 3. You provided an additional $50 million in general funds, adding to the $100 million provided last year for LSRA for purposes of energy project matching funds. This committee also added lithium mining to the list of permissible uses and indicated that of the appropriation in this section, up to $10 million is specifically set aside for lithium mining, although it is an up to amount. So the expenditures don't have to go to lithium mining. And there is a matching requirement of $1 of appropriated funds to not less than $1 of matching funds. Mr. Chairman, this on page 83, section 327 really is tied into the bill draft that you just adopted, which will become a Senate file. This is an appropriation of $160 million. And I think they're at least theoretically tied together from the general fund to the office of the governor to supplement appropriations in section 321, which is energy matching funds, or section 325, which is infrastructure, federal infrastructure matching funds. And it can only be expended on those two purposes. I would make two comments relative to this. Comment number one, as currently written, we couldn't have known about the bill that was just adopted for sponsorship. So this is not contingent upon that bill. You may wish to make that contingent upon the bill, because if the 160 is not materialized in the general fund, is there really an intent to set this 160 aside? How closely do you want to tie those? Secondly, I just wanted to recap for the committee's knowledge the total amount of funds that is being set aside for both infrastructure and energy matching funds. In section 321, it is now 150 million. In section 325, it is 70 million. And in section 327, it is 160 million, for a total of $385 million that has been appropriated under this bill to the governor's office for purposes of energy matching or infrastructure matching.
So Don, you were giving us the total balances in section 321, 150 million, section 325, 70 million, and then I missed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, 325 is 75 million.
75.
And then section 327 is 160 million for a total of 385.
Okay.
Just to be aware. Correct.
And that's for matching dollars through the infrastructure bill, right? So they're kind of different things, but.
They are, however, as currently written, this section 327, 160 could go to
So either
either
way, yeah.
purpose.
Okay, which infrastructure bill are we talking about? I thought this was the governor's big projects.
The IIGA,
Hmm.
federal infrastructure, because remember, it requires matching dollars for like 20% on all of those projects that come with. What's the total dollar of that bill on?
Mr. Chairman, this can be used on any federal IIJA matching programs. So for example, some of them are for airports. Some of them are for wildlife crossing. Some of them, I believe, relate to broadband. Some of them are highway and infrastructure. And he can use any of that $75 million appropriation to match any competitive grant that we could receive.
And most of those grants from the IIJA are like 80-20 or something like that. But it's variable.
It is variable.
Remind me what IIJ is. Inflation's in there somewhere.
Mr. Chairman, I think you are correct. No, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Inflation reduction is a
IIJA.
different one. Okay.
And how much dollars are available to the state through that, the IIJA?
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to look again.
You got a rough, got a rough number, Kevin?
To the nearest 100 million.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have my computer. I can tell you.
But
I'll get
it's-
that to
It's
you.
between 500 and a billion.
Oh, I think it's probably north of there, over 5 years, with the vast majority of it going to the
Water.
Department of Transportation, because all of their 5-year appropriation was rolled into the IIJA
And so that's 110 a million a year right there.
a year.
Right.
All right, give me IIJ again.
What's it
Infrastructure.
stand for?
Investment.
Infrastructure and
Investment
Investment
and jobs.
and Jobs Act.
Okay.
So Don, it might be helpful if we have just a little synopsis or a little one pager that, so when we need to go to the well, we'll have that information right in front of us to explain that.
Which well is that?
Just when we explain the purpose of,
floor?
yeah, for the floor. of what
Yours
the
is a well?
IIJA is.
How deep is it?
Well, they keep drilling it deeper and giving us more money.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no further questions on section 327, I'll proceed to section 328. This is a JAC approval of governor's letter for enterprise in inflation. It relates to governor's letter number 4, and the introductory sentence is put there for a reason to direct agencies as to how to expend these funds. It includes $14.4 million of general funds, $3.5 million of federal funds, and $2.2 million of other funds. The appropriation is made to the state auditor's office and to be distributed as directed by the state Department of Budget, consistent with governor's letter number 4. It is for purposes of increased cost of utilities, travel, food at state facilities and facility healthcare services. Mr. Chairman, the next section for your education is section 329. This is employee compensation. And let me walk through this. There's been a fair bit of discussion as to how we arrived at this number. The original request by the governor was for $61 million. As we understand, there was a 2-part motion associated with that. The first part, or the easy part of the motion, was to modify the 15 months requested down to 12 months for 1 year. And that was Senator Hicks's portion of the motion. And then secondly, Representative Stiff's portion of the motion reduced the request by 8/11, or multiplied it by 73%, which arrived at the $35.66 million. This, I believe, is roughly equal to 8% of the general fund cost for a salary increase. Correct. Yes, reduced by 27% to 73% for 12 months. So agencies, and I know they've done their math, if they just take their submission, multiply it by 73%, and then take 12 months of that 15 months, you get the amounts that appear in your budget here. Subsection I is for the executive branch. Romanet 2 is for the University of Wyoming. Community colleges are in Romanet 3. Romanet 4 is the Supreme Court.
The compensation, run us through the numbers as well. What were the reductions based on our actions?
Mr. Chairman, I think there were 2 challenges associated with that. I think the executive branch will come forward with materials, and I believe that as this stands, it would provide a roughly 6% increase on average. Of course, some are going to be higher and some are going to be lower because it applies to merit as well as market adjustments. Last year, you'll recall, there was an appropriation for about double this amount, $67 million in total, I believe. And that provided about a 7.9% increase of populated positions. So a big distinction there is the vacancies, of which I believe there's over 1,000 vacancies, were not moved up. For example, a vacant position did not benefit from any of the merit portion of the increase. And so that, I think, provides for some of the complexity in the comparison from one year to the next.
So double the amount.
Miss-
8% versus 6%.
No, Mr. Chairman, last year's was for 2 years. It was a biennial amount.
Mr. Chairman,
Please, Representative Stith.
and so Don, I believe that, tell me if I'm incorrect, but I believe the import or the effect of the way it's drafted right now is to have the cost to the state be a commensurate aggregate percentage increase for 1 year over what we did just last year. So essentially, it's the same percentage cost to the state from what we did last year. So it's commensurate, it's the same. It has a different potential impact because what apparently happened last year was that a vacant position got a 3% raise. So even though the aggregate average was 6% of what we actually did money-wise, because the vacancies only got 3% raise, and the actual human beings who actually work for the state, their average increase was 7.9%, is my understanding. So,
Mr. Chairman, tomorrow, there'll be a conversation with A&I, the Governor's Office and State Budget Department, and these questions will be fully explained. As far as the math goes that Representative Stith presented, I believe that's pretty close. And it is fundamentally predicated on the fact of what we did with the vacant positions versus those that people that had jobs with Wyoming, because we focused on retention.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Don, I just want to go over this again then. The governor's recommendation was 61 million. We're now at 35.6 total cost.
Correct.
Thanks.
And that's just for the balance of the biennium, 35.6. Biennially going ahead is 70 million.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, how does what we're doing compare to the, the thing that's on everyone's mind, the 40-year high inflation, compared to those around us, other states, other government entities? Would that be something I could get information on if you don't have it now? Thank you.
Mr. Hibbard.
Mr. Chairman, that percentage will be shared with you tomorrow. That's one of the most important factors. We believe that we've been experiencing something in the neighborhood of 15%, but we will discuss that in full tomorrow because that is important.
Anyone else? All right, does that conclude the employee compensation
It
section
does.
329?
Mr. Chairman, just two more. Section 330 is at the bottom of page 86 for cost allocation to state agency or state facilities. This again provides notice to agencies for purposes of implementing Governor's Letter number 17. There is no general fund appropriation associated with this. This provides for the ability of the state to allocate its general fund cost across federal funds and other funds. And finally, Mr. Chairman, section 331 provided a JAC added match for the state fair. We did use 2018 language to incorporate this, which is almost identical. It is for $500,000. And since we use that prior language, it's a little different than how we do things now. I just wanted to bring to your attention. In this case, we just say a state match. While they applied it as a one-to-one match last time, it does not specify that. So if you wanted to ensure that it was 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 2-to-1, that is unspecified in the language. Mr. Chairman, the bill is effective immediately.
Don, just to backtrack a little bit, back on pages 75 and 76, our position is we want this money to go into the permanent funds. So, and you said there's a cross-dimensional time rift here if we do too many different things at once. What do we do there? We just, we adopt the governor's rec in P, Q, R, and S instead of going to the reserve funds?
Mr. Chairman, the cleanest approach, if you desire these funds to go, would be to strike all of from line 16 through 27 on page 75 and all of page 76 and reinsert the governor's recommended or your own recommended deposits to the permanent fund.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, while we were
Elizabeth?
meeting, the Supreme Court responded. Claire Smith specifically said that her request in the circuit for the respite was for both circuit court and district courts.
Okay, thank you. I had to have that clarified. All right, so now local government. Thank you, Don and Elizabeth. That's yeoman's task, as they say.
Mr. Chairman, if you wanted LSO to walk through the local government bill very quickly.
Please.
I'd like you to introduce a new staffer to LSO Budget Fiscal, Taylor DuPont, and he will begin to walk you through LSO 0405, formal draft 1.0.
Taylor, welcome. Are you an economist as well?
I am, sir.
Okay. Make sure you pull that mic a little bit closer. All right.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm Taylor DuPont,
Let's
LSO.
assume that we're ready.
All right. So the bill 23 LSO 0405 implements JC's amendment to the governor's recommendation for the local government distribution. Governor's recommendation was originally for 26,250,000. And the JC action was to reduce that in half to an amount of 13,125,000 and to have that distributed via the so-called Madden-Bebout formula. So what this bill does, you'll see on page 1, lines 7 through 9, is it amends the chapter of the 2022 Wyoming session laws, which originally made the local government distribution for fiscal years 23-24. And the way that it amends it on page 2, in that first paragraph, lines 3 through 5, is it increases the amount from 105 million, which was the original amount to be distributed through the Madden-Bebout formula, and increases that by the 13,125,000 up to 118,125,000. And then specifies through the remainder of that paragraph in lines 6 through 13 that extra 13 million would be spent in fiscal year 24. The rest of the bill just makes conforming changes, which changes the original distribution, which was to cut that 105 million in half between fiscal year 23 and 24, and specifies that it'll instead be distributed as mentioned in that subsection A, which just requires the additional amount to be spent only in fiscal year 24.
Thank you. Remind me when we talked about this during our meetings, didn't we have I think somebody requested a listing of all the ARPA funds that the various counties and cities had received. Was that right? Was there an exhibit to that effect?
Mr. Chairman, there was.
And is that in this budget book?
Mr. Chairman, there's not a printout there for you, but I believe it is on your SharePoint website. So we can maybe email that again.
And of course, I'm so facile with SharePoint at this point that with an hour or two, I'll find it, but thank you. I appreciate it. And then.
Could you just email that to all the members?
And so then, before we go to public comment, I want to make sure, so you have the fiscal note and it shows local government distributions revisions. And this is the Madden formula with the BBOUT modification, correct, Taylor? Mr. DuPont?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, and there's a corresponding table that shows without the BBOUT add-on, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's not part of the fiscal note that's attached to this bill, but we have that as a resource that we can send to the committee.
All right. I just want to make sure that that's available to the local governments so they can see the impact of the addition of the BBOUT. I don't know how to describe it, the BBOUT amendment to the Madden formula. All right. Anything else for staff before we go to public comment? Anyone? All right.
So the only other question is.
Turn your mic on.
How much have they received so far? Were there any additions? Where do we stand?
So the question is not, this is not ARPA, this is of the 105. How much have they received? How much do they have yet to receive?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, they received 52,500,000 throughout fiscal year 23 so far. One payment was in last August and the other payment, well, I guess the other payment will be in 4 days on January 15th.
Please, Vice Chair.
So did we not, it sticks in my mind, so we added 105 under the traditional Madden BBOUT formula, and then we added 15 to there that was distributed under the Hicks model. And so the total appropriation, I believe, in this last budget session was 120. Have I got that right?
The Hicks model is Madden BBOUT.
No, Hicks model was yet different.
Okay, wow. So Taylor, you're in the right place. Look at all the models we have. It's economist paradise.
Well, and I believe, Mr. Chairman, I think that the Hicks model really focused even focusing more on smaller communities and kind of got into that same conversation we did on the MRG stuff. They kind of used a formula there, the lowest 30%.
And I think I think in terms of helping the small and the poor, it went beyond the BBOUT formula.
Yes.
Okay.
So the total expended is around 67, 68. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, the total so far would be 60 million, 52.5 from the.
So the 15 was split.
Okay, wait, you lost me. I had 50 million in fiscal year 23. Give me the numbers again.
Mr. Chairman, 60 million in fiscal year 23, with half of that to be expended in about 4 days. And that's made up of 52.5 million according to the Madden BBOUT formula, and an additional 7.5 million according to the Hicks formula.
Okay. You got what you need? Okay. Don.
One last thing, just to clear up another question. The state is set to receive 2.78 billion under the IIJA, 2.78 billion.
Over 5 years?
Over at least 5 years, yes.
Where that was in one of the footnotes, wasn't it? That we looked at that.
Mr. Chairman, you've set aside $75 million for potential matching funds. Some of these do not require any matching funds. They're, typical highway funds.
Yeah, just give me the page that we were talking about. Okay, the 5-year grand total under IIJA.
2.78 billion, and that does not include potential competitive grants that we could receive in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The detail on the distribution of the IIJ funding can be found at the State Budget Department website under the ARPA public document. I just pulled it up on my phone.
Nice website.
So
Nice website.
You like that?
Yeah, I do.
IIJA is under RAPA.
Yep.
Okay.
We have yeah. I think we could have about a 5-minute conversation just using acronyms.
Yeah. Could you get that to us ASAP, right? Okay, we're opening it up for public comment. Please, we're on local government distributions. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Willix here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Appreciate this opportunity. Couple of things that we're appreciative of the extra money that's allocated in this and really, we like the governor's note better, but we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you so much. I do think the last comment was important. This extra money will also be available for us for these matching things. So the IAJA also will have some opportunities that'll come to local governments and will at times could require matching. So being able to have some additional money that we can use towards that matching to really invest in Wyoming is valuable and important. The only other comment I made, I know you've talked about the Hicks formula, the Bebout formula, the Madden formula. I would encourage you that the 105, at least at the county level, we are happy with the Madden formula. If you want to change that additional money, then look at that, but please don't change the corpus that has been used in the past under the 105. Leave that alone in the county distribution. And then if the extra money you wish to use a different hardship formula, whatever term you want to give it, that would be appropriate. But we would hope that you would leave the 105 alone. And then if you wish to have a different allocation for the extra money that's allocated in this budget, that would be fine. We'd be glad to be part of those conversations. But we've worked really hard to get that formula where we think it's pretty acceptable across the board. And you'll note there's two components in here. There's the municipal side and the county side, but the Madden formula and the others worked fine in the 105, and we appreciate that. Other than that, I just stand for any questions you may have, or let Mr. Frazier go, whatever your choice is, Mr. Chairman.
Questions? Just, you noted that the money be helpful for the match for the IIJA, but we haven't restricted it. I mean, they can spend this money on anything they want, and not necessarily save it for IIJA match.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. There has been the hope that that the extra would be used on one-time stuff, not reoccurring. So the 105 definitely is used across the board, I believe, but the extra, I think many of us look at if it's extra at a short term, we ought to use it for one-time investments, not reoccurring expenses. If I'm understanding what your point was.
No, you just said that it'll be helpful for IIJA, but there's no guarantee this money would be used by them for the IIJA.
No, correct. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Correct. It's just an opportunity that would be there. Correct.
Yeah, if you can educate your members to hang on to some of that for the 20%, it'd be helpful.
Yes. And then, sorry, Mr. Chairman, we definitely have had those conversations and know between that IAJA, there are some opportunities there that we're talking about and actually have people helping us looking for those opportunities to make sure we do them right. Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Willix? All right, welcome. How are our friends at WHAM?
Doing great, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. For the record, David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities, and I appreciate the committee's time. I have just a few short comments, and then if you have any questions, in the tall grass on the details of the Madden formula or the Bebout or Hicks amendments, Mr. Willix would be happy to answer those. I have with me to my left, Mayor Kelly Craco of Albin, who is also the chairman of WHAM's legislative committee. So I'm glad that he came over in the weather and stayed. So appreciate him being here. Just a couple of quick things. Let me lead with thank you. And not just for the extra money that you're considering tonight, but thank you for direct distribution, that we come and we talk about every time. And I think sometimes we grouse a little bit when we talk, when there's talk of reductions and that kind of thing. And I just want to make sure you understand how much our members appreciate the direct distribution and how important that, you probably know how important that is to us. We've certainly badgered you enough about it that you know that that's really important to our members. A couple of quick things, as was mentioned in the LSO report, and as you know, the governor's supplemental budget recommended 26,250,000. In the interim, the committee reduced that by half to the 13,125 that we're talking about tonight. I don't want anybody to fall out of their chairs when I say that I'm going to ask you to consider reinstating that full 26,500,000 and a couple of 26,250,000, and just a couple of items to consider as you're thinking about that. That is a significant amount of money that will be helpful to our members. But whereas it will benefit 100% of your constituents, 100% of your constituents live in a city, town, or county. And it represents only 2.6% of of the surplus, of the anticipated surplus. As Mr. Willicks indicated, we've had the same discussions about how good the timing is on this extra money because, you know, our communities, you know, we talk about large communities and small communities, and most of the communities in Wyoming are very small communities. And it's difficult for them, in all of our communities, but you know, the smaller, the more difficult it gets. It's difficult for them to find matching funds, and they leave a lot of opportunities on the table with federal grants because they all require matching funds, and it's just really difficult for those communities to come up with it. So the timing of this is outstanding in that regard, that there are these federal opportunities. We've had the discussion as well that it'd be wise to take this opportunity to use it for matching funds. And I can tell you a lot of our members intend to do that. So, and again, because of kind of the, you know, the opportunities that always exist, but some unique opportunities right now that matching funds can help with. Again, I'd respectfully ask that you consider reinstating the other $13,125,000. With that, and again, I don't want to sound like we're looking a gift horse in the mouth. We appreciate every dollar that you help us with. And with that, I would take any questions.
Representative Walters. Oh, okay. I thought I saw you going for your mic. I try to keep an eye on you. Anyone for Mr. Fraser, Mr. Willicks? Mayor, just welcome. The reason that I asked about those two comparison sheets is it's important to you because the BBOUT formula aids towns like Alvin.
Yeah.
And I imagine it hasn't changed much at WHAM since I was part of the government affairs and the board. We really tried to preach the ethics of the three musketeers, all for one, one for all. And sometimes larger communities saw they were losing $1 million here and $1 million there, and they weren't so anxious to take care of their smaller brethren. And it'd help if you can educate your membership on the difference between the Madden formula, the Madden BBOUT. I think it's good for your membership to understand that we are really trying to help a lot of the smaller, poorer, weaker communities and counties.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kelly Creek, Mayor Alban. And one thing I'll say on the formulas, you're not going to get 99 of them to agree because somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to win. It's been that way forever. It won't change. But just to add a little bit to what they said, even though we got some ARPA money that helped out in that extra 15 million, I'd like to have you really consider bumping that up to 26 because this is the fourth biennium that we've been at 105 and we were up to over 180 million prior to that. And if you look at inflation over 7-8 years, especially the last 6 months a year and probably the next year, the inflation is probably 10-12%, even though they say it's 8%. So, and doing projects right now and bidding them out and the cost of everything, and really appreciate you to look at that. And yeah, 13 million might not seem like a lot, but when you're doing the dollar things now to 8 years ago, there's a lot of big difference. So please take that into consideration. Like I said, we thank you for the 13 million, but anything over, we'll appreciate that too. So I'll stand for any questions.
Questions? All right, thank you. Do we have anybody on the Zoom that wanted to testify? Okay, please.
Mr. Chairman, just in light of the conversation from our commissioners and our locals, as we talk about these amendments, the Madden with the BBOUT and all that, I just want to confirm with Dawn that our historic 105 is the Madden formula that includes the BBOUT amendment. And that's the way that's been for some time. And so the 105 is the Madden formula with the BBOUT amendment. And then the 15 that we received was completely kind of hybrid Hicks amendment. So, okay.
Bob, I love these hyphenated names. It reminds me of Graham Redmond Hollings. It was a 2.83% reduction on everything. Okay, there being no further comment, I'll close public comment. What's the pleasure of the committee? Been moved and seconded. Discussion by the committee. Senator Guru.
Just a question, and it was brought up by Commissioner Willicks about where are, I guess, and I don't know who's Don, I guess, or whoever else on the committee who can help me. What is the current state of the split? He talked about leave the 105 alone. I was kind of under the impression that the base amount was left alone and that the added money was done based on a formula. Is that true, or am I just?
Mr. Chairman, that is accurate.
Okay, so the 105, if we pass this bill the way it's written right now, the 105 would be in the old formula and the additional money,
Yeah,
whatever
this-
that is.
This bill is mo money.
Yeah, but
Distribution and the distribution of this extra 13 million is under the same formulas as the 105.
okay,
Be about man.
all right, that's okay. Thank you.
Further
Thank you,
discuss-
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion from the committee? Further discussion? If not, let's go ahead and take the roll.
Mr. Chairman, the motion is on 23 LSO 0405, committee formal draft 1.0. Representative Henderson, Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Sherwood, Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Representatives Juan and Sir Dave, Senator Anderson.
Aye.
Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Nethercott, Senator Salazar, Co-Chairman Nicholas, Chairman Kinsky.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the motion has prevailed. House bill or Senate file?
Okay. All right, take that one to the well.
All right.
Don, so that concludes our agenda for this evening. Give us a preview of what we're doing tomorrow in the morning and at noon.
Mr. Chairman, at 8 a.m. tomorrow, I believe you have noticed the, and I say believe because I was in here when it was noticed.
The Craig report.
The Craig report, and then a educational discussion of the local government capital the state capital construction bill and the ARPA bill.
Correct. Okay, and then at noon, it's the governor's office clarifying this math that the Hibbard-Stith formula.
Mr. Chairman, I think they are going to speak to employee compensation.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Any housekeeping matters, Don, at all?
No, Mr. Chairman, you do have one more bill that you've requested, which has been written if you wanted to schedule that at some time. Very similar to the encumbrance bill. We've got that. Yes.
Oh, that's right. That can be next week. Anything else from the committee? Anything else? All right. Thank you all so very much. Senator Guru.
The way I just heard it, that we have a meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow and scheduled a meeting for noon tomorrow. Is there anything? No? Is there anything else?
No.
Those two meetings are scheduled. There is no other meeting scheduled upon adjournment at this time.
I could.
Well, actually, I think what we know is if we need to carry over, in other words, if Craig goes 2 hours, then we may want to carry over for the bills that are outstanding. That's how we noticed it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, 2 hours in the morning, we can make short work of CapCon and ARPA and Craig with minutes to spare. Minutes to spare. All right, I'll declare